everyone, and welcome back to Time 100 Talks. I'm your correspondent, Ashley C. Ford, and all week long, we've been speaking with leaders and change makers from the 2020 Time 100 list. These individuals play an important role in shaping our future, coming up with solutions to help us build a more equitable and more resilient world. Today's guests include historian and writer Ibram X. Kendi, Executive Director of National Nurses United, Bonnie Castillo, entrepreneur and fashion designer, Dapper Dan, singer-songwriter, Norah Jones, and Netflix's Vice President of Original Documentary and Independent Features, Lisa Nishimura, who I will be speaking with right now. Lisa, welcome to Time 100 Talks.
It's an extreme pleasure to be here. Thank you.
I want to get right into it. How does it feel to be one of this year's Time 100 honorees? Does it feel good?
It is stunning and surprising, really incredibly surprised and wildly humbled. I mean, this is a list that I've been looking at for years for an incredible level of inspiration and courage. And so to be considered among them is I think I'm still processing the honor, but so humbled and grateful.
Well, I would certainly say you've earned it. You've had a hand in some of Netflix's most notable films and documentaries over the past year or so. I mean, let's just talk about Tiger King. Let's talk about To All the Boys I've Loved Before, one of my favorites. Let's talk about White Helmets. What does it feel like when you know you have a bona fide hit on your hands, when you're starting to get that feedback, you see what's coming in and you just know it?
It kind of starts before that, right? It starts when you're working with the creators. You take that first meeting where you really want to understand what the creative ambition is, right? When you sit with a writer or a director, really what you're listening to is their dream, right? It's their vision. It is creating that which does not yet exist in the world. It's a little bit of magic. So having the great opportunity to sit in those rooms with those great minds and hearts and spirits and understand what that is, and then to be able to be in process with them to help them actualize and to bring that to the screen, like that in itself, that process is an incredible honor and so exciting because it's never the same ride twice.
Right.
The twists and turns, any filmmaker will tell you the plan is never 100% executed. In fact, a lot of times it becomes delightfully different. And so that process is amazing. And what you hope for, I think, in storytelling is that you're able to truly connect with an audience. That is really, if you can actualize your dream and then find others to connect with, that is the dream actualized. So to your question about like when you start to feel it bubble, that is a feeling beyond measure because you know that this thing that you have held deeply and you have created has found its brethren, right? It's found its hearts and minds. And I think the thing that's so exciting in our role, because we're really here to help support, right? We are here to really help actuate vision. And a lot of times I think about it as sort of like midwifing a process. They are the creators. We are here simply at every turn to say, how can we help? What do you need? If you hit a roadblock, come to us. We're here to try to help. But it's really their journey and seeing them flourish and seeing them connect with their audience. And in our case, we have the immense opportunity of connecting them to 190 countries simultaneously.
Wow.
That is extraordinary. And for them to have that immediate feedback loop, whether it's seeing on the service in the top 10, their film starting to explode, or certainly now in today's world, it's all on social media, and being able to have a global conversation about the story that's so near and dear to them is incredibly rewarding.
Listen, it's not even that I have to imagine. I've definitely been part of those conversations. Trust me, I've used a hashtag and I've gotten into a discussion or two about the content of some of these documentaries and films. How do you create films that become these massive cultural touch points? I mean, we're all going to be thinking about going into quarantine, going into lockdown and watching Tiger King. Like, people are going to be talking about that
perhaps as long, as we're alive. How does that happen?
Well, in this case, in almost every case, it's about exceptional filmmaking, right? So the filmmakers, Eric and Rebecca, so deeply researched, had taken so much time to develop relationships and trust. And I think importantly in this particular case, really allowed each of the subjects to present themselves, right? There's not a characterization or a judgment that's drawn. It's simply giving people the space and the time to express themselves in the first person, and then allow those stories to evolve in time. And, for us, we always think of it as story first, right? So when folks come and talk to us and they tell us about the storytelling universe, the shape it's going to take, sometimes you can't know until you're in it, right? So sometimes it starts as a feature film, and then you realize you need a little bit more real estate, so you go to a limited episodic format. Other times you start thinking it's going to be episodic, and you think, you know what, this is going to be most impactful, most powerful, as a feature film. And in the case of Tiger King, the thing that was clear and extraordinary was the access that Eric and Rebecca had secured, the trust, and their ability to allow the story to truly unfold in an organic way. And I think certainly having the world suddenly finding themselves indoors, wanting to really fill their time. And, we think about what we do as delighting and entertaining, but, in this case, I think it was people were curious about a world they knew very little about. And then it was also escapist. It was so far from everybody else's true reality of being indoors that they got to go to this place, this brand new place, told in a first person basis, which I think is really riveting, right? When you get to experience another person's life. And, you talked about To All the Boys I've Loved Before, you've talked about White Helmets. I mean, I think the goal state is really about providing an opportunity for connection, right? And what better way to do that than to have a front row seat to somebody else's lived experience? And when it's done through these incredible filmmakers' hands, where you can sit inside that experience. When I look at something like To All the Boys, and I see Lana Condor as an Asian American actress playing Lara Jean Covey in high school, just in love, right? We can all relate to that. But when I was growing up, I didn't get to see heroes like that. There were no Asian American leads, certainly not in a romantic lead. And what I love in these films, and really Jenny Han's beautiful book series upon which they're based, is, Lara Jean Covey's just a girl, right? And the way that they have deftly in the films presented her is the culture informs her, right? She is a Korean American girl, but it doesn't entirely define her experience in the film. So it's a really genuine sort of experience of this girl who just wants to be seen and wants to be loved. And we're all rooting for her because she's beautifully flawed and incredibly optimistic. And I just think that shared experience is incredibly powerful to have, that front row seat to that.
I love that you said that specifically, because on top of being a fan of To All the Boys I Loved Before, on top of being a huge fan of Jenny Han and her writing and her work, one of the things that Netflix has really done well in this space, I think, is include all kinds of stories with all kinds of people at the center of those stories. So I'm wondering, even though you guys have done so much already, what kind of stories would you really like to see more of on Netflix, or really anywhere? Like, what are the stories that you feel like, I want more of that? I want to hear more about this. Where's that story?
Yeah, I think the way we think about it is, if you think about Hollywood, it's such a huge and influential cultural export to the world. But for the last 100 years, we've had a pretty specific look and feel to what a hero is, right? To who your leads are, who can fall in love, who can save the world. And the reality is the world is a lot bigger than that, right? The United States is 5% of the global population. We have the immense blessing of a global audience, right? So when you are trying to present stories for 190 different countries, right, and 193 million member households, guess what? Like the idea of what their hero is and the person that they're going to fall in love with is going to be wildly diverse, right? Our singular and only mission every day is to engage people and delight people. So they need to see themselves. They need to feel themselves. They need to be able to dream the possibilities in the same way that, you know, when I see Lara Jean Covey, I'm like, wow, okay, like that didn't exist before. And there's a whole generation of young girls who now see themselves in that way. And you multiply that around the world, right? Whether that is your race, your gender, how you identify, the idea that we are all so incredibly full of complexity. And what I hope for is that stories allow us to really embrace our full complexity and our full nuance. And to do that, you have to keep going up to the plate and swinging, meaning there can't just be one story about this one experience and that one experience. You have to keep presenting, because if you think about the full spectrum of stories that can be told in the Asian experience, in the Black experience, it's rich and rife, it's sci-fi, it's adventure, it's romance, it's all those things that we can be and that we can identify with. And that's our real opportunity, is that we can do all of that. And that's what we're committed to doing day by day by day, just stepping up to the plate and trying to make that rich diversity of story.
Speaking of commitment, you're a Netflix veteran. Like, the platform has been growing more and more during the time that you've been there. And I think more than people can really fathom. Because I know even when I think about the numbers, it is hard to fathom. What has it been like to actually be on that journey in real time, watching this platform happen?
It's a great question. Somebody likened it to flying into space on a rocket that you're building while you're flying, which I think is a really great analogy. You know, for me, I joined in 2007. At the time that I joined, we were a DVD by mail company in the United States. And the thing is, the job that I took at that time was to buy DVDs from all around the world, across every format, which ended up being a stroke of luck for me. On top of being, you know, an absolute lover of diversity of storytelling, so it was frankly a dream job from that perspective, it really helped educate me on really the hunger of audiences, and that we had been underestimating what audiences were really, really hungry for, based on what had been fairly limited distribution, meaning it wasn't always easy to find a Japanese anime in the United States, or a Bollywood story, or a Korean drama, or an incredible story from Nigeria. To access these stories was really quite difficult. And what I got to do was, you know, bring these stories from all around the world to our audiences in the United States, and through, you know, our interface, to be able to make suggestions and recommendations of stories that they might love, that just might happen to be in a language not their native language. And because what we were doing was saying, hey, we think you might love it because what you love is romance. It just happens to be a romance that takes place in Korea, starting to really recognize and see that people actually were incredibly hungry for that if you lowered the friction and made it easier for people to connect. And that really became the roadmap, right? As we started to grow globally, as we started to have creators from all around the world tell their stories, you know, today, fast forward to today, where we're really committed to releasing all of our original films and TV shows on the exact same day, all around the world, and localized, right? So in your local language, whether that's subtitles or dubs, so you can engage in the story in the way you're most comfortable, but you can go right into the heartbeat of the story as it's intended to be told. So I think, you know, it's so exciting because the commitment from the beginning to understanding how do we connect people to story, that hasn't changed. My personal journey here has been immensely dynamic and exciting. I think the thing that I feel most fortunate about is that I've had the opportunity to really reinvent myself. This is a place that is in a constant state of change and evolution, because guess what? The world is in a constant state of change and evolution.
Yes.
And we're trying to stay ahead of that so that we can give viewers around the world what they want. But that has meant that new opportunities have arisen for me, and this is a place where you have that opportunity. So, and I feel immensely grateful that I've been given those shots to try, and not just to try and succeed, but also try and fail. And what's the learn in the fail, right? And I think that's one of my favorite things about this place and this culture, is that there isn't shame in failing, right? In fact, it's incredibly important to have the courage and the generosity to share your fail, so that none of your colleagues make the same mistake. I always say to my team, I'm not telling you not to make mistakes. I'm just saying make new mistakes.
Yes.
Right? So if you make a mistake, share it. Be generous with your teammates. Let them learn with you, and then go push the envelope and fall on your face somewhere else, and then share that learn and share the wins, right? So I think being in a place where it embraces that evolution, the opportunity for people to continue to grow. And I think another thing where sometimes it's difficult. People don't let others grow, right? Have you ever had that happen in a relationship where, family is such a great place for that, right? Where they just think of you as the little kid at the folding table at Thanksgiving, and it's like, I've actually grown a little bit. But the same thing applies to your peers and your colleagues and the community around you. Is, can you take a moment to take a breath and look at that person, ask them questions, and really allow them to continue to grow and evolve, which I think is just such an important part of being in a team, right? And being really supportive of one another. And I think that that's something that I have been a great beneficiary of, is the opportunity to keep excelling and growing and making mistakes and growing from those mistakes and trying again.
And look what happens when you get the opportunity. Look what we get when you get the opportunity to stretch out that way confidently and secure that the people you work for are behind you all the way. I really like hearing about that. I've loved talking to you today. Congratulations again on being a Time 100 honoree.
Thank you so much. The honor is overwhelming, and I have to say, it just makes me want to do more. It just makes me want to be better, and it just makes me really understand how finite a moment we are here on this planet, and what are you going to do with your moment? What are you going to put back out into the world? And I can't thank you enough. Thank you.
Lisa Nishimura, I can't wait to see what you do next.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You're watching Time 100 Talks. I'm correspondent Ashley C. Ford, and up next, Time's Lucy Feldman will be in conversation with another voice from this year's Time 100, writer and historian Ibram X. Kendi.
People need to realize that racist is not who a person is, it's what a person is being in any given moment. In those moments, they have the ability to be aware of what they just said or did or didn't do, and change. And in the very next moment, be anti-racist. Books certainly changed the way, people think. The role of books like mine, like many other books on racism and anti-racism and even Black life, what people can do, they can become aware, they can become clear that the problem is not people. They can learn about the complexities of different folks and see themselves in that difference. And ultimately, they could realize that the problem is actually policies, that the problem is actually power. The book can almost be like a springboard for them into action. In June of this year, we had demonstrators in the smallest of towns and the largest of cities, demonstrating against police brutality, the largest anti-racist demonstration in American history, galvanized by the murder of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor. This growing awareness must be followed by a growing willingness to transform our societies. I've been inspired by the willingness of demonstrators to think big. We have an ability as human beings to eliminate social problems. And we have the capability right now to create some semblance of joy for every human being living. In order to bring about change, you have to believe change is possible.
Hi, I'm Lucy Feldman, and I'm joined by 2020 TIME100 honoree Dr. Ibram X. Kendi. Welcome, Ibram.
Hello, it's great to be on.
It's super exciting to be talking to you as a new member of the TIME100, which is this huge community of people that we recognize every year for being the most influential people in the world. And I'd love to start with just what that means to you, and more broadly, what it has felt like to have your work recognized, debated, celebrated on such a major scale this year.
I mean, I think obviously it's a tremendous honor to be a member of this community of incredibly important people. And certainly it's an honor for people to be reading and debating and saying helpful and constructive things, about my work. But at the same time, I think that what's got me to this point is because I've just been so razor focused on the work, so razor focused on transforming and thinking about ways to transform, the world and to shatter sort of racism. And so that's really always going to sort of be my focus. And certainly it's incredible to be recognized, for that. But I always try to keep myself centered and planted and to really focus on the people who are suffering under the boot and knee of racism.
It always comes back to the work. And in the intro piece that we just saw, you described how books can help people understand that when it comes to racism, it's not always the people, it's policies that really need to be addressed. Can you explain that a little bit more?
Sure. I mean, I've studied the long history of racist ideas, and racist ideas make humans believe that there's something wrong with other humans, that there's something wrong with those other racial groups, there's something wrong with those people who don't look like us. And they are the reason why there's racial inequity and injustice in our society. And so, what I'm calling on people to recognize is that there's nothing wrong with any racial group. And the real cause of those inequities that we face in the United States and around the world is policies. And we need to transform and change those racist policies. And that's where we need to be focused on, that they are the problem, those policies, not people.
It makes a lot of sense. And one of the policies that you've pointed to as a major contributor to inequity, to racism in this country in particular, is healthcare. There's never been a more poignant and important time to examine our healthcare policies. I'm curious what you would like to see put into place.
Oh, I mean, I can you imagine if we had a healthcare system where it was built into the system that high quality, free healthcare was a fundamental human right. And so to me, it's not enough that every American has access to, free healthcare. It's not enough that every American can get preventative care or even treatment when they're ill, but it must be high quality. And high quality healthcare is not the type of healthcare in which someone is diagnosing you because of your race, in which someone is mistreating you because of your race. High quality healthcare is just absolutely sort of critical. And I can only imagine the number of people who would be living every year if we had high quality free healthcare for every single person.
One of the projects that you've been working on at the Boston University Center for Anti-Racist Research is this COVID-19 racial data tracker. I'd love if you could just tell us a little bit more about that and what you found.
So yeah, I mean, since we essentially established and unveiled this tracker in mid-April in collaboration with the COVID tracking project at the Atlantic, we have consistently found racial disparities, for literally 5 months. We have consistently found that Black and Native and Latinx people are disproportionately being infected and killed with COVID-19. And we know that in order for us to go about solving the problem of racism, we have to see and measure and track the problem through racial data. And so that's why, we've been tracking this racial data to really put up a mirror to America for these disparities. But also we aim at the Center for Anti-Racist Research to the racial health disparities, in which we're tracking educational disparities and criminal justice inequities and economic inequality, because we need to know where the hotspots are in order to fight racism.
It's such an interesting project. I'm so curious to hear at the center and the broader focus, what are some things that you're zeroing in on right now? Or are you pretty much focused on COVID-19, which would make a lot of sense?
So, I mean, we are certainly focused on COVID-19, from our COVID racial data tracker to we're actually about to unveil some research studies on COVID racial inequities, whether as a result to sort of health and even economic disparities. But we're really focused on building the center in and of itself, and building this sort of apparatus, and building a research center that not only tracks racial inequities, but also studies the racist policies leading to those inequities and proposes anti-racist policies that can heal or eliminate those inequities, that really thinks through how we can sort of narrate those solutions in the problem in a way that everyday people can understand and see the need for that change, and work with grassroots advocates and policymakers to institute that change, to really bring equity to our country.
To stay on health for just a minute, I wanted to ask you, I really appreciated the way that you've spoken publicly about your own colon cancer diagnosis. Health struggles can be so isolating. You never really know what someone's going through. And you came out and you talked about the fact that you received this diagnosis while you were working on your book, How to Be an Anti-Racist. I'd love to know, how are you doing? How is your health now? And how has that experience shaped your worldview?
So, I mean, I think someone who is overcoming a serious illness like stage 4 colon cancer, we never really know how we're doing. We never know what's brewing, in our bodies. And we certainly hope, and I certainly hope, that there isn't, cancer cells brewing. Since the last time we checked, we didn't see any, but I just think that you're absolutely correct. When I was battling cancer, it was in public. I didn't really announce that I had battled, or I was still battling, colon cancer, till a year after I was diagnosed. And so there are many people right now who are walking around battling a serious illness that we don't know. And so I think it shows us the importance of being graceful and caring to people, even when it's hard for us to do so and to be so, because we just never know, who and what people are going through.
Yeah, absolutely. I've had illness in my family, and health touches everything.
It does. I mean, you can't do anything if you're not healthy, right? Your physical health, and, it was an eye-opener for me in terms of how critical it is for me to take my physical health first, and to ensure, that I am doing what I need to do on a daily basis to try to remain healthy.
Well, I'm really glad that you're doing well, and thank you so much for talking about it and sharing your perspective on that.
Of course.
Switching gears a little bit, alongside the pandemic, obviously, we're sort of talking about this already, but just to name it, we're in the middle of a huge movement for racial justice. And to me, it feels incredibly powerful. It feels like something I've certainly never lived through before. But I'm curious, as a historian, how do you think this time will be remembered?
It's either going to be remembered as a time in which you had a greater awareness of racism than at potentially any other point in American history, but that awareness did not translate into action. So it's either going to be looked at a time of great dismay because our children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren are going to be angry that we didn't seize this time, we didn't seize this moment. Or it's going to be looked at a time in which, again, it was this incredible amount of awareness of racism was translated into action, in which Americans were willing to support the big solutions to this big problem, in which Americans started asking questions like, how do we eliminate the racial wealth gap? Not reduce it. How do we eliminate gaps in school funding? How do we eliminate disparities in police violence? How do we eliminate racial health disparities? And so it's going to hopefully be a time that historians write about in which we ask those questions and then we answer them with policy proposals. Mm-hmm. And we develop the political will to drive into place those policies that then presumably led to equity in areas that has never existed before in United States history.
It makes me very excited to hear you talk about that way. I mean, I hope that that's the outcome that we see. I hope that we see all these changes. I mean, it's so important. It's everything.
It is. And I think that's what we need to be fighting for. And that's why I'm advocating for people to advocate for immediate equality, not policies that will gradually sort of reduce inequity, because if we should not be thinking about what's the most politically viable. We should be thinking about what is going to bring the greatest amount of relief to the greatest amount of people. Mm-hmm. And I think if we're thinking there, then we'll be thinking about, again, those policies that can eliminate these disparities.
You've spoken before about how racism hurts everyone, including white people. And I feel like that is a great message to drive home to anyone who's feeling resistance to this. Can you talk about it a little bit with us now?
Sure. So I think that it's racist policies disproportionately sort of harm, people of color, particularly Black and brown and indigenous, people. But that doesn't mean that they're not harming white people too, just at lesser rates. And so you take, for instance, voter ID laws, which, one North Carolina court a few years ago found was sort of targeting African-American voters with surgical precision. That doesn't mean that there weren't white voters who too were disfranchised between that voter ID law. Or if you take it back 100 years, yes, Black people were widely disenfranchised as a result of Jim Crow voting policies, but many poor whites were disenfranchised too. That indeed, some people believe that one of the reasons why states like Georgia started opening back up by late April is because many people started recognizing that the people who were predominantly those who were dying in Georgia were Black. And so as a result of that opening, it led to, of course, Black people continuing to die, but you know who else died? White people too, not at greater rates, but who knows how many white lives would have been saved if these states did not open back up, right? And so I think just like how many Black lives and Latinx lives and Asian lives and the lives of really all Americans. And so I think it's incredibly important for people to sort of realize that But also it's important for white Americans to realize how they're consistently and constantly controlled and manipulated by their racist ideas. I mean, you have a president right now who is saying to white Americans, you know what, I can control you by your racist fears of Black and brown people. So I'm going to run a whole sort of campaign on law and order and make you believe that I'm going to save you from those violent sort of predators, and I'm going to win re-election off of that. It doesn't matter that I've, botched the COVID response. It doesn't matter that I've driven the country into an economic recession. It doesn't matter that, we're facing the horrific effects of climate change. You're not going to care about any of that. I'm going to still be able to get you to vote for me because I know how scared of Black and brown people you are. I mean, that's basically what he's saying to white Americans, which again shows just how racism, controls and manipulates people.
Another thing that's sort of related to this is an idea that you wrote about called feelings advocacy, which, if I understand it, is when people feel terribly about the injustice that they see in the world, and then they go home and they read a certain book, or they show up at a single protest. They do something that makes them feel better, and then that's where it ends for them. Did I get that right? And can you talk about the problems with this approach?
Yeah, I mean, can you imagine, let's say, if you watch a horrific cell phone video of somebody being killed by police and you feel horrible, and then you decide to go to a demonstration, and then you feel better after the demonstration, and then you don't do anything else. And then what happens next week? Somebody else is killed as a result of police violence, and then you feel bad again, and then you go to a demonstration again, and then you feel better again. So what's changing? The only thing that's changing is your feelings, but you still have this persistent amount of racial injustice that is persisting. And so the question is, are you really trying to make yourself feel better, or are you really trying to change society? Because if we're trying to change society, then we're not going to feel better because we went to a demonstration or we read a book. We're going to feel better when people are no longer dying because of the color of their skin.
Yeah, I think it's a really powerful concept, feelings advocacy, that we should internalize, because there's so much virtue signaling, there's so much talk. And what would you suggest that the people who really want to take action should do? What's the best course of action?
I think people who want to take action should think about what they have to give to this larger movement, anti-racist movement. And meaning, do they have the ability to join a local organization that's challenging racism? Do they have the ability to fund that organization? Do they have the ability to provide some sort of expertise to that organization? Do they have the ability to use their platform to elevate and spread the message of that organization? I think every one of us needs to figure out what is it that we have to give to support those entities, those organizations, those campaigns, even those policymakers who are really trying to drive sort of policy change. That's where we need to be focused on, not our feelings.
I would love to talk about one of the other Time 100 honorees this year. As you know, Angela Davis is also on the Time 100 2020. And I know that she's played a big role in your own work. She played a big role in Stamped. And I'd love to just hear from you how she has influenced you.
So, I mean, first and foremost, it was 30, so really close to 40 years ago, at a speech in the Bay Area, that Angela Davis said, it's not enough for us to be not racist. We must be anti-racist. And so she was one of the earliest people to call for Americans to be anti-racist. And in many ways, in my book, Stamped from the Beginning, I chronicled her life of sort of being anti-racist. And I chronicled it as a model for what many of us can strive to be. And I chronicled someone who has been willing over the course of her career to defend the most vulnerable groups in our sort of society when other people were unwilling to defend those prisoners, those women, those queer people, those poor people, and especially those Black women and those Black poor people and those Black, queer people, and who was willing to really speak out against many forms of oppression, from sexism to patriarchy, to homophobia, to capitalism, you name it, she has challenged it. And I think she has always really inspired me. And so to share, to be, on this list, on the Time 100 with the great, Angela Davis is a gift in and of itself.
Oh, I'm so glad to hear it. And obviously, it's extremely well-deserved for both of you. Fantastic to have you both on the list this year. So looking ahead to next year, I just saw actually on my friend Mitch Jackson's Instagram, shout out to Mitch Jackson, who's a wonderful author, that you have another book coming out. The book is called 400 Souls, and it's an anthology of a bunch of writers, and you edited it with Dr. Keisha and Blaine. What can you tell us about the book?
Yeah, so 400 Souls is really a collection that we edited, Keisha and I, of 90 writers, of 90 Black writers who literally, as a community, wrote the 400-year history of people of African descent, in colonial America and the United States. And so what happened is we actually we had 80 writers who each wrote 5 years, amounting to 400 years. And then we have 10 poets who each wrote poems based on 40 years, of history. And so, we felt who better than a community of writers to write a history, of a community, particularly when this community celebrated its 400th year. So, 400 Souls, we hope, is not only a book that writes history, but is history, that it's like a diary entry into really the history of letters, so people can have some sense of what Black people at the 400-year mark were thinking and thinking about their past and even their present.
That's genius. I cannot wait to read it. It sounds incredible.
Yeah, I can't wait for it to be out in the world. 400 Souls is coming.
I feel like, as a final note, it's always nice to think a bit about the future and what gives you hope.
I actually derived hope not from something I'm seeing in society, but really a philosophical belief that in order to bring about change, we have to believe change is possible. And so to me, hope fuels change making. It fuels activism. It fuels campaigns. You have to believe you can do the impossible in order to wake up every day and fight for what's on the other side. And I just believe we can do the impossible, which is to create an anti-racist world.
It's incredibly inspiring to hear you talk about it. Thank you so, so much for joining us, Ibram.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
Welcome back to Time 100 Talks. I'm Ashley C. Ford, Time 100 Talks correspondent, and we'd like to thank AT&T for making this next segment possible. All week long, we've been speaking with individuals who have made the Time 100 list. This year, the list recognized more scientists, doctors, and nurses than ever before. Before we get to our next conversation between Time's Alice Park and National Nurses United Director Bonnie Castillo, let's take a look at fellow member of the Time 100, Nurse Amy O'Sullivan.
first COVID patient in Brooklyn, she was my patient. And on that Sunday, I was feeling short of breath.
I have a crash, 49-year-old male.
It's COVID, respiratory failure.
The last thing I just remember is doctor saying we're going to intubate you, and I remember thinking I just wanted to come back to work and be a nurse. We can't really escape it, none of us.
As major cities went quiet, an international army of healthcare workers went to battle. And they did so at great personal risk to themselves and their families.
Mamma, stai tornando? Le persone sì, che sono malate.
It's just too many people that I know died from this virus. What if something happens to me?
When we look back on this time, let us not forget those who pressed on and became the bravest of this generation.
We don't even think, we just do. We suit up and we go. We keep each other together to not fall apart.
I should be jaded by now, but I'm just not.
It's just where I'm going to be. This is where I have to be. I'm meant to be here.
I'm Alice Park, and I'm joined by Bonnie Castillo, a registered nurse, executive director of National Nurses United, and a 2020 Time 100 honoree. Bonnie, congratulations on your inclusion on the list, and welcome to Time 100 Talks.
Thank you. Thank you so much. We really, really appreciate this, and I certainly appreciate it, but really our whole union appreciates this.
Well, I wanted to talk to you about really the year that we've had. It's certainly been a challenging year for all of us, but I think it's fair to say that it's been especially hard for frontline healthcare workers. From a nurse's perspective, how prepared were we for this pandemic, or how unprepared were we for the pandemic?
Well, that's for us the most heart-wrenching part of this experience, is that we were and still are so woefully unprepared for confronting COVID-19. And for us as registered nurses, it's very frustrating because we know what we need. And so while we say that the virus is novel, the science of infectious control and protection isn't. And so we know that we could have done better, and we need to still do better.
And what are some of the ways that we can improve and learn from this experience so that we are better prepared the next time? And we know there, as we hear from public health experts, that there will be another outbreak. There will be a next time.
Yes, and we're still in the middle of this outbreak. What we know is that we need a national, coordinated, robust infectious disease response. And we haven't had any of that. And instead, what we've had is a very discoordinate and response, and a real lack of leadership at the federal, state, and local levels. And so what has happened is that we haven't been able to protect our frontline workers, nurses, healthcare workers, and in turn, then our patients. And so as registered nurses, we know what we need to do, and we need to fully enact the Defense Production Act and actually manufacture the PPE and the protections that we so desperately need on the front line. If nurses aren't protected, then we're not able to protect our patients and in turn, the public. So what we are forced to do is essentially improvise, and in many cases, nurses are actually having to bring their own PPE to work to this day.
I think that, as you said, has been one of the heart-wrenching things that we've learned from this pandemic, is that we assume that resources are there, that, you know, for a healthcare worker like a nurse, that everything they need, they've got, especially in the United States. Can you tell us if there were states or programs that you see as models that got it right in terms of being prepared and were able to implement emergency plans? Did you see examples of that? Are you hearing from your nurses about things that were right?
I mean, unfortunately, we are still living through this pandemic and trying to save as many lives as possible. And where we've had success is where we've been able to be vocal and use our collective voice and speak out against these dangerous practices. For instance, making nurses and other frontline workers using surgical masks instead of higher levels of respirators. And we know that obviously then we ourselves become vectors of infection instead of being able to keep our patients safe. So in terms of where we've seen examples of good examples, you know, in other countries, we have been in communication with our nurse colleagues, for instance, in South Korea and in Canada, where, you know, they experienced some of these shortages initially, but then for instance, in the case of South Korea, they started manufacturing PPE, the personal protective equipment there, and then we're able to adequately protect their workforce. We need to do that here in the United States too, but we need leadership. We actually need national leadership. Instead, what we have is, actually we have doubters and deniers of science, and that has actually we've seen this happen with federal agencies. And so instead, the bottom line is dictating the CDC guidelines. What we're seeing is in this in our healthcare industry, which is a profit-driven industry that is based on the bottom line instead of care and need. And so we need to shift that. We need to shift that to ensure that our frontline workers, our nurses, and other healthcare workers get the protections they need so that we can in turn protect our patients and then ultimately confront COVID-19.
We saw early on in the pandemic, you mentioned the issues with shortages of PPE for nurses. We saw early on that nurses were very vocal and really stood up for saying, you know, we shouldn't be reusing masks. We shouldn't, you know, have to kind of reuse the PPE as well, and raise questions about the safety of that, which turned out to be justified. How much change has that sort of vocalization of their concerns, how much change did that enact, and do you feel that that's pushing us toward the right direction?
Well, for us, it's been a matter of life and death. And the National Nurses United, we have lost 11 members. And if we had not been out there collectively advocating and fighting tooth and nail for every single N95 and every single protection, we would have lost many more. Unfortunately, as a nation, we have lost over 200 nurses to COVID-19, and you know, obviously, we're in terms of deaths from COVID-19 we're close to 200,000 deaths. That's completely unacceptable. It didn't have to be that way. So our collective voice, being out there in front of our hospitals, and advocating for to ensure that we get the equipment we need and that the patients in turn would be safe, is what has enabled us to force this healthcare industry to give us the protection. So every single mask that we have been able to get is only because we've been able to be out there collectively. And we know that we wouldn't be able to do that if we didn't have a strong national union, of which we have.
As we heard from some of the nurses just earlier who responded to the pandemic, you know, they said, we don't think, we just do. I'm meant to be here. That dedication really comes with a price, though. And what have you heard from nurses about the price of that commitment?
Right. Well, and I, you know, completely agree with that. Because we have been expertly trained to do this work, and we are a science-based profession, so we know what to do, and we always know to err on the side of caution and use the higher levels of protection. It's not a question for us in terms of whether we go in or don't go in. We often say that when disaster strikes, nurses run into the disaster. They don't go the other way. And we're trained to do that. We are compelled to do that. We have a mission to do this. But we also need to be respected in terms of our professional judgment. We know what we need to do it safely. And doing it safely means having the higher levels of protection, of which we know that we can achieve, right? But because we know that in other countries they've achieved this. Unfortunately, we have met resistance in our workplaces, with our employers, and at the federal, state, and local levels in terms of government. And the lowering of guidelines has left us even more vulnerable. So when I say lowering of guidelines, I mean the CDC, other state agencies, and they're lowering the guidelines according to what the healthcare industry is saying they can or can't do.
And one of the issues that nurses have raised is the one of how infectious, they're exposed to an infectious disease, and the question of how infectious they might be to their own families. One thing I'd like to ask you is that in terms of preparedness, we don't seem to have a system where when nurses, as you said, were running into the pandemic, there was nothing really to say, once you've been at work, when you come home, you should be isolating, or here's where you can go to isolate if you're concerned about, having been exposed. Has there been any movement toward addressing that issue for nurses and healthcare workers?
Through our collective action. And when I say collective action, I mean, one of the, we had our neighbors, we had our fellow union sisters and brothers bring us their masks, whatever that they could, muster up, and because they knew that we were going in there. Of course we were going to go in there. We are there for those patients. And it's very difficult, because at a time when we're putting it all on the line and we're willing to do this, we are, deathly afraid of infecting our family, our children. I mean, the stories of nurses not being able to hug their children or their partners, their spouses, and they stopped doing this months ago, having to self-isolate and, figuring out ways to self-isolate, going through the ritual every shift. Our nurses haven't been able to shelter, not one day. They have been going in, and they continue to go in, but they also knew that we don't stand a chance of confronting COVID-19 unless we do better. And that means getting the proper protections, the proper staffing, and we're not going to stop advocating. We're not going to keep our mouth, we're not going to remain silent. Well, we know we can do better, and it's simply a matter of leadership at, as I said, at all levels, federal, state, and local levels. And it is a matter of ensuring that healthcare is a human right, that that we have a healthcare system that is based on care and not profit.
Why do you think it's so hard in this country for people to accept or act on the idea that healthcare is a human right?
Mm-hmm. Well, unfortunately, we have a huge industry that has, been operating and profiting upon people's illnesses and death. ultimately. So as registered nurses and union nurses, we are used to fighting in our hospitals for protections, and we do that, well. But during a pandemic where you have so much more death and it is so infectious, this model is a failure. You actually have to have a model of care, and it has to be a national model of care where the priority is on patient care and need and finding that cure for the novel virus, and not on making more and more money. So that, that's a fun, we fight these kinds of fights pre-COVID. We've been in, we've always had to advocate for safer staffing and, health and safety regulations and standards. And I think that we've done a very good job of that. But when we were hit with the pandemic, and we knew that the model was one of looking at the bottom line. We knew that they weren't stocked. The healthcare industry subscribes to what's called just-in-time stocking practices. So we knew that the stock was probably insufficient. They locked it up, literally locked it up. So we had nurses going in and there were respirators there, and they were locked up, and they wouldn't give it to them. And nothing happened to them. In our mind, that's criminal, right? When you know that you're confronting a deadly virus and that you potentially could give to so many other people, and so many more people are going to die. And you have someone, right, where we had instances of where this PPE was locked up. That's what we were dealing with, which is why nurses were forced to go into their basements and their garages, and why their neighbors brought them any kind of an N95. It wasn't even hospital grade N95. It was our garden variety N95. But it was better than nothing. But the fact that they had to do this is just criminal. They should not, and they are still having to do this. So, which is why we do not have this under control. And we are looking at second and third waves. We're looking at months, we're looking at years. And, this for us, that's why we are out there in front of our hospitals. We're not going to just stay silent. We're going to take care of our patients. We're taking care of our patients, but we are going to be advocating forcefully. We're not going to just stay in the hospital walls. We will be in the state legislatures. We will be in the Capitol. We are going to be voting. We are actually our leadership. We have made an endorsement of Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. We know that we have to start there, and we aren't going to just stop there. We know that we have failed so badly at this point that it is going to take some time to reel this back. We are doing what we can do every single day, and we know we're saving lives, but the lives that we've been able to save is a result of us speaking out and advocating for more protections. And if we hadn't done it, if we hadn't been out there, we know that we would have lost more of our own, but we would have lost so many more patients. It makes us sick that so many people have died, and so many more people will die until we start following the science. We know what to do. This is not an unknown. We actually know how to confront COVID-19 and other infectious diseases, but we actually need fundamental change in our healthcare system. And as I said before, this is about having a system of care based on healthcare as a human right.
Are there specific policies or laws that you mentioned that your organization is looking at amending or reforming that led to the fact that, some of that PPE was locked up and remains locked up today, and that it's still happening today? Are there any specific policies and regulations that your group would like to address?
Well, certainly we, are in support of the HEROES Act. To date, every congressional measure has failed to address the protecting the frontline workers. And that's completely unacceptable. So we are in support, obviously, of the HEROES Act, but more importantly, and we have been fighting for this for decades, Medicare for all. If we actually had a healthcare system that was based on human need and care instead of profit, we would have done so much better. And you can look at other countries that actually had a system of care. They not only their rates of infection and death are so much lower, and their leadership made remarkably better decisions. We need to have a safety net. And that safety net is healthcare security for all of us, for every single person here. This is fundamental. This is a fundamental tenet that we believe in, and we know, it is at this point, we have seen this system function under a pandemic, and it has been an utter failure.
And on top of everything that you mentioned as far as the resources and the policies, given the infectious nature of COVID-19, nurses really, had an additional burden in which hospitals changed their policies so that families and relatives could no longer visit patients. And nurses really bore the brunt of the additional kind of emotional support.
Yes.
How has this impacted them, both as professionals and as people really facing these difficult situations every day?
Well, we have seen so much more death than in our entire careers. This is an unprecedented moment for every single registered nurse in this country. And we have acted as our patients' only guide out of this world. This has been a very hard time. While nurses deal with death and dying all the time in terms of their career, this has been unprecedented in terms of the numbers of death and acting as the only sort of guide or last person with our patients when they pass. And it's been very emotional for them, but it's also a sacred time that we believe we have to be there for them. We do not want one patient to die alone, and we want to honor their being, and we don't want them, we don't want them to suffer. We don't want them to be alone at that moment when we see so much fear in their eyes. And we know that we've seen some very difficult deaths here, but it is one of the things we do. It is one of the things that we hold sacred, that we will continue to do. But it has taken an emotional toll on nurses because they know that they or their family and loved ones could also be in that position, which is why they will not let their patients die alone.
And has your organization discussed and implemented support systems for your nurses? Because as you said, this is both a physically and emotionally difficult time for them.
Yeah. Well, we have been advocating, for full health care, including mental health care, for everyone in this country. And yes, we are, as union nurses, we can actually make demands at a bargaining table. And we are making demands of the employers to provide for nurses who become infected. We're fighting for nurses to be tested. All right, we still have problems with nurses being able to be tested on a regular basis, or even tested when they have an exposure, and being able to quarantine for the full 14 days. So we're advocating that they're covered immediately for healthcare, full healthcare, if they are if they have suffered an exposure or been infected, and that means mental health care and support and social services as well. And so that's something that is very, it's very important to us, and we will always fight for that.
And Bonnie, in closing, I wanted to ask you, while the pandemic continues to be challenging, what positives do you see coming out of this experience?
Well, I think it's illustrated what doesn't work. And I think it's paved the path for us to work with not, as nurses collectively, but also with all of our allies out there, which are our communities and our families and our patients and other social justice advocates. We've seen the vulnerable populations that have bore the burden. This is one of the reasons why that we speak out as social justice activists, right? We know that we have to confront these other social determinants of health to correct them. So we have the examples. We have the examples of what doesn't work, and we also have concrete examples of what does work. So I think, we have clarity in this moment. We're still fighting tooth and nail because we have to. We're not out of this. We're still in the middle of this. And while we know we're used to our patients and the public sort of having this cognitive dissonance, denial, sometimes people call, because it's hard. People want to go back to normal, right? We all do, but that's not going to happen unless we respect the science of infectious disease and we build a system that's actually going to provide the care that people need. It's really just that simple. And that's a good thing. So we're hopeful about that because it's not like we have to figure it out. It's not like we have to do studies or commissions. We know. And we know that we have a big role to play. As registered nurses, we'll be right in there. We want to care for everyone. And so that has been for us, we're hopeful about that.
I think that's a great message to end on. Bonnie, thank you so much for your perspective on the healthcare workers who have and will continue to guide us through this pandemic. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for the recognition. We're really thrilled about it. And it's further validation for all of us.
You're first. First to respond. First to put others' lives before your own. And in an emergency, you need a network that puts you first, that connects you to technology, to each other, and to other agencies. Built with and for first responders. FirstNet, the only congressionally authorized wireless network for first responders. Because putting you first is our job.
Welcome back to Time 100 Talks. Our next guest is a man who stays in a dapper fit. Fashion designer, entrepreneur, and 2020 Time 100 honoree, Dapper Dan. Welcome to Time 100 Talks.
Thank you, Ashley, and I'm excited about being here. This is so amazing for me, but even more so for my community. So thank you for having me.
Let's talk about that because, Time 100 recognizes the most influential people from around the world in various fields. So how does it feel right now to be recognized, most importantly, celebrated for your contributions to the culture and community?
Well, it means so much to me. All my adult life, I've been trying to build on this image of staying in Harlem, but making a difference. And having an image that the young kids all around here can look up to. Mm-hmm. So this like completes that. This gives them something to say and something to point at, you know what I mean? And somebody who they interact with every day. When I was growing up in Harlem, born and raised in Harlem, when I was growing up in Harlem, I saw Sugar Ray Robinson, Malcolm X, all the jazz musicians. It was a normal thing for us, but all that has disappeared. So I want to bring that back. Even when entertainers come to my store, I say, we got to walk Harlem together. You know, young people got to see it to be it. So
Right.
thank you, Tom. Thank you for this award. I'm really honored.
You know, you are a leader in this industry, and COVID-19 has affected so many places in music, TV, food, travel, and it has affected the fashion industry a little bit. But what are the lessons you're learning from this experience of COVID-19 and the fashion world? Because fashion is so present. You know, you're in person, it's your uniform, and now it's through cameras and not necessarily in person. How does that feel?
That has a big effect on me because me having my atelier in Harlem, and the cheapest jacket that I sell in my store is $2,700, right? So it's important for me to let the people in the community know that this is really their atelier. You know, we're just bringing people into the community and bringing money into the community, but this belongs to them, and I belong to them. So every day I stand in front of my store greeting people. You know, I come in, open up, and then I stand outside so I can greet the people in the neighborhood. I live 3 blocks from the store, from the atelier, right? And I take 2 buses, and then I walk so that I can interact with the people so they can see that I'm part of the community. And I do that every day. And I engage people. So with COVID, it takes something. It takes that energy away, you know, it takes that engagement away. So that's the biggest thing, you know. I can deal with, you know, the economical side,
right?
But the human side, is what's,
That's the tough part. How hard was it for you to reimagine something like Fashion Week amid a pandemic? Because I've watched, you know, I've worked in different newsrooms over the years. I've watched entertainment teams, fashion teams go out to Fashion Week, and I know how busy that is, and I know how much people get to see each other in those spaces. How did it work this year? How is it going to continue to work?
Well, you know, because of fast fashion, that's one thing that's changing the landscape of how we celebrate fashion and push fashion out to the public. That's one thing. And then sustainability. There's a lot of things that's going on in fashion that's changing the landscape of how fashion is presented. And that's with the fashion industry. But with people like myself, see, in fashion, there's 2 staircases, right? One staircase is you come up if you accept it. You know, I've never been on that staircase. I didn't get to that staircase until I took the elevator when I got in the building. So I don't know what it is to come up them steps. You know, all of a sudden they were sent for me and I got on the elevator. The next thing I know, I'm up on the roof with Gucci.
Right.
So for those who came up that other staircase, I can imagine it's like a really big deal. You know, because they are attached to all of that. Believe it or not, the first time that I ever went to a fashion runway show was when I got in this partnership with Gucci.
Wow.
I existed completely independent from the regular structure of the fashion industry. I had no contact with them until this Gucci project came along.
Right.
So it's 2 different worlds, you know, that just came together.
You have this long and storied history in fashion, and particularly street fashion and couture. Like, you have been in these spaces for so long. What has it been like to watch the relationship between street fashion and the runway change over the years? Because nobody was doing these collaborations before Dapper Dan was doing these sort of remixes.
Yes. Wow, you know, I feel like a space cadet because it seems like I navigated these 2 parallel universes and I found a point where which they meet, you know, and I was able to land there, I was able to dock there. And so to me, it's exciting, you know, but coming together, it's like there's some turmoil, you know, when two, you know, opposite forces come together like that. But all in all, it's exciting, and young people are really embracing it. And now the industry is approaching it in a different way, you know. You know, so I'm really happy about it. It's a change has come.
Yes. And there's more work to be done, I think. Like,
yes, a lot more. Yeah.
What else do you think we need to be moving forward toward to bridge this gap between the haves and the have-nots, essentially, in fashion, because you know and I know that talent is everywhere. And that skill is everywhere, and it comes in all sorts of places and all sorts of packages. How do we make sure there's even more representation in this space and in this industry?
Now, this is a very sensitive topic, and I want everybody to try to get this message clearly, right? Mm-hmm. Gucci has done and has had the greatest impact in terms of inclusivity and diversity. I mean, they have really made a difference, like taking me and let me do exactly what I did. And when I was in Harlem and I had my store in East Harlem, right. And I have everything in place that I would have had I normally had the same trajectory as those who come up the other staircase. Mm-hmm. But the most important thing that I want to say is that if the other brands would follow Gucci's footsteps, we could do a lot of work. I can't imagine like a Fendi taking a minority and putting them in a minority or have an atelier in a minority. I think that's what they did. We need to put pressure on Fendi. We need to put pressure on Prada, all them other things to do what Gucci has done. Mm-hmm. That's part one. Part two is this. We need not to forget the Dapper Dans, the Jay-Z's, and the Sean John. And let me explain to what I mean by that. Mm-hmm. We come from the grassroots. We made it. Sean John and Sean Carter made a difference in hip hop. They put it globally. Dapper Dan was able to take street culture and take it globally. So you got rap by these two giants that went globally. Then you got Dapper Dan, and we took the street culture couture globally. We need not to forget that. We need to continue to create pathways for the next Dapper Dans, for the next Sean Johns, for the next Sean Carters. We need not to forget. We have these programs now that are bringing people of color in, right? But they are privileged people of color. Mm. We need to reach down, I mean, you take a diamond. You could take a diamond and give it to a jeweler and have him fashion it. But what about the diamond in the mine? The diamonds that have not been mined yet. And that's what the ghetto represents. We need to still have pathways for guys like myself, Dapper Dans and Sean Connors and Sean Johns, like I say. Don't clog that. The ones who have been accepted in these programs are gifted and talented, but don't forget us. We're the ones who stood at the tip of the mountain, at the verge of falling off cliffs when we came back. These are the stories we need for the bulk of the people out there in all these poor communities around the world, not just here, but around the world. They need to see the Sean Johns, the Dapper Dans, and the Sean Carters. That's who they need to see. In the favelas in South Africa and in the favelas in Brazil, we get people from all over. We need to do that. When fashion does that, then we can say, okay, those pathways need to be open. And what they need to understand too, and I want to put this out there and close it on this question, is this. I'm on the bus, I'm on the train, I'm on the sidewalk. The people who get up in arms about anything that fashion industry does, they bring it to me. And I'm there to hear it. You follow what I'm saying? They need to have someone like me to vent on and to engage with, that they can talk about this with. Don't forget where this came from. Right. We have a history of developing culture, and then it takes on wings and we can't reach it. So I just want to express that point.
What has it been like after, your relationship with Gucci has evolved over time? What has it been like to be in this place at Gucci where you get to create from a place of freedom and from a place of expression that is otherwise unhampered? Like, what does that feel like? Because I think not enough people know.
Yeah, you know what? It's like I am in almost 100% in my element with this deal. The only restrictions I have is I can only work with Gucci. And I'm happy about that because to me, Gucci has the most tools that I like to work with. They have crests and they have colors and they have, what I've been known to make, Logomania. It has all the ingredients that I worked with initially that the other brands are just copying from them, So it's exciting in that respect. But I owe it to myself. I owe it to my community to move on. Now, I need for my community to see me do the same thing that Tom Ford did. To do the same thing that Mark Jackson did. You align yourself with a global brand. You get a global name, and then it's incumbent upon me as a Black man, as a minority, as a person of color, to move on and to show that that's possible. So that all made it possible for me. So I'm happy about the whole thing.
What are you most excited to see next in the fashion world? Because I feel like, you got on your visionary glasses today. And I know when you look through your visionary glasses, it seems like you see the future. You know what's coming down the line. So what are you excited to see?
I've traveled through Africa, Europe, South America, the Caribbean basin, and everything leads towards the European concept. You follow me? Now, street culture has changed that. But you have to remember, we're ex-slaves and we are fully, embedded in Western culture.
Yes.
What I would like to see, we're leaning towards it, but what I would like to see is to fully bring all these other vibrations in, to make fashion more universal, to extract it, but not to appropriate, but to pay homage to and have all these other people and inclusivity involved. That, to me, that's the height of fashion, to bring all of us together, all the cultures together. And then we could grow and show, our appreciation of each other.
I agree. What have you been working on lately that feels like it lights you up? Like when you get to work on it or when you get to work in that space, you are in the middle of your dream, as some people would say. Every once in a while when I'm doing something that I really love, when I'm writing, when I'm doing an interview, I feel something inside myself where I'm just like, oh my goodness, I'm in the middle of my dream right now. When do you have that?
Let me tell you something. The most important thing to me in all my studies, what freed me up from everything that had me bonded, that had me bonded is information. Other people's information. And then when I go out and get my own information, with my own information, I can mold my own life and my own brand. So what gets me excited is, where can I go to get the symbols that everybody submits to some extent to symbols? The cross, the crescent, the Star of David, you know what I mean? The Gucci horse, the lock and G's, all these are symbols. And what gets me excited is to create that symbol that all my people and minorities can look at and say, this is us. This is us. Dapper Dan created something for us, and it's global, and it's all accepted. That gets me excited. And I went back to Africa. And I looked for the most powerful symbol I can have that embraces all of us. All the minorities from North and South America, right? And when I say, where does that root come from? I say, I went to Nigeria, and I went to the museum / art gallery, and I say, I want to learn about symbols, African symbols, something that has a strong attachment to all the minorities in North and South America, right? And the Yoruba religion has that. So I went and studied the Yoruba religion, the Yoruba symbols and stuff, because when you see Santeria, when you see the Haitian, and when you see Brazil had the condomble, it's all there. I say, that's the one thing that's all there. I'm looking for that one symbol that'll bring us all together. That one thing that we can rejoice about, and say, oh, this is us. Even though we have people of color speak Spanish and versions of Spanish, and we got people who are the Caribbean basin, our music, all the variations in our music, but it's all the same. I want something that ties that. I want to tie that and say, this is all of us. Okay, let's get this thing together over here. That gets me excited. When I stumble across something like that, I get really excited. I can do this. I can do this. They're attached to this, So that's how I feel about that.
I love that. And in more hopes that you can share beautiful visions for the future, gotta tell you, that last one is really, Whew, I really, you talk about that as a symbol. Things, I'm just like, yeah, that sounds beautiful, please. What are your hopes for a post-COVID world? Eventually, we're going to be able to be in the same rooms again. We're going to be able to share space again. What do you hope it looks like when we're doing that?
Okay, one of the things that I like to emphasize, when I was a young man, I could not understand. I needed to understand. What is it about? What is it about being Black? Why are we suffering and going through the things we do? Why do other people look at us the way they do, you know? And so I think one of the first books I read was the African Genesis, and the other one was Territorial Imperative. And these were really significant books, and they set me on my journey to Africa, you know, to find out at what point did we start looking at each other, people of different shades and colors, the way we do today, you know? And then I looked at America, you know what I'm saying? And then, and the ancient Egyptians, you know, I learned that in African Genesis, everything we all came out of Africa. We all the same, right? And then we come here to America. There's something really mystical about America. Either, you know, it's like it's this hand we don't see that's guiding us, you know? When you look like them, one of the greatest slogans on the dollar bill is "E pluribus unum." And when I went to Africa and I said African Genesis, I say, there it is, "E pluribus unum." You know, so out of Africa, from one came many. And when you look at the meaning of on the dollar bill, "E pluribus unum," out of many came one. That's why it's so important to work on what we are doing here, you know, to create this oneness, and then it is to combat the forces that separate us. But the only things that can do that is history. We got to understand history and the role it played in separating us.
Right.
You know what I mean? So what I like to see for the future, I like for us to understand where we all come from and where we all need to go. E pluribus unum.
Thank you so much for your time today, Dapper Dan. It's been fantastic to get the opportunity to talk with you. And congratulations again on being a Time 100 honoree. It is much deserved.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Blessings to you, Ashley.
Thank you.
Do something. Get in, Trevor. Good, Trevor.
If John Lewis as a 19, 20-year-old wasn't doing what he did, I would not be here.
You cannot replace a John Lewis.
Let me hear you.
That was a quick look at John Lewis' Good Trouble, a documentary released earlier this year, directed by Dawn Porter, executive produced by Time Studios. This documentary honored the life and legacy of late Congressman John Lewis. Available now, streaming everywhere. Make sure you check it out if you haven't already done so. Up next, we have singer-songwriter Norah Jones, recognized by the Time 100 in 2004, who will be joined by Time's Reza Bruner.
Hi, I'm Reza Bruner, and I'm joined today by singer-songwriter Norah Jones. Norah, thank you so much for joining us for Time 100 Talks.
Thanks for having me.
So you were honored on the Time 100 list in 2004, which is just 2 years after your debut Grammy-winning album, Come Away With Me, made you really a household name. And I know you've been a household name pretty much ever since then. And this summer, you also released Pick Me Up Up the Floor, which I believe is your 7th album. So that's quite a stretch of being in the spotlight, being part of the music industry. When you look at this and look at the last 2 decades, really, what's changed the most for you as you approach music?
I think I'm just a lot less worried about how things will play out for other people. Not that I was overly obsessed with that in the beginning. I always kind of did what sounded good to me, but I still overthought things, you know, because I was a young person. So I think I don't worry about it anymore. It is what it is. It's just music, you know, it's not going to hurt anybody.
In fact, it often helps people a lot. I know that I've turned to a lot of your music, especially over the last 6 months, because it's so warm and welcoming. So thank you for the music. And what are you most proud of over the last few years and looking back?
I think I'm most proud of just being able to be myself still, and from the beginning and still now, and also being able to change. And I'm also really proud of just trying different things and collaborating with so many different people. That's been probably the biggest joy of my career. I feel just really lucky to still have a career at this point, and it's a weird business, but I feel very proud of all the people I've worked with. And it's also a great business, if you're lucky.
And it's been a uniquely challenging time over this summer, especially given how live performance is not able to go on right now, and especially with album releases and trying to figure out how to promote music during this time. How were you able to continue to flex your creative muscle, and what's gotten you through while your normal schedule has been so upturned, I imagine?
Yeah, I definitely miss playing with my various bands and with other humans in general, but we all miss those kinds of things. For me, I've been doing these weekly web streams. I've been doing them since I think the end of March, and they've kind of gotten me through. I think if I hadn't been doing those, I just play like 4 songs a week. And for me, if I hadn't been doing those, then I probably would have played music for 6 months, because I have 2 young kids. So, it's always snack time. But it's been really rewarding and really fun for me to explore some of my old songs, play covers, just have that moment to myself with music. And I wouldn't have gotten that otherwise. And also to connect with people in that way. I'm not really that big on social media. I'm not very good at it. But I think I kind of found my way with it through this. I do what I do. I sing songs, I play music. So for me to do that over social media and connect with people in that way, which is what I'm used to doing, it's been great.
I was going to ask next if you found that you've started interacting with music differently because of everything that's going on, and clearly you have in a way, but have some of your past projects, or has your work taken on a different meaning to you in some way based on just the conditions of both the pandemic and also social change in the country and everything that's going on in the world?
Well, it was kind of interesting because when everything first locked down, I had just finished my new album and I was so excited about it. And then I really quickly thought, well, this seems totally silly right now. Everything else is so much important. And, the label wanted to delay it. And I was like, that's fine. But then I thought, well, actually, music is good for the world. And, I was listening to so much music to sort of get me through. And I thought, well, why not release it? It's not going to hurt anybody. Again, back to that, music is supposed to help people through things. People connect in that way. They feel less alone when they're connecting to a feeling. Especially this album, it was a bit melancholy, dark, maybe. And some of the themes in the album sort of connect with just being a human and that sort of sense of longing, and it's sort of fit for this period. So, I think the more music, the better.
Yeah.
So I kind of came around from feeling like what I did was very insignificant, which in some ways it is, but also then I started doing these weekly live streams, and it just, this is what I do. So I have this to offer people. And so I might as well, in this time especially.
Yeah. It's been really beautiful to see artists like yourself step up and sort of give of themselves and of their work to the virtual community over the last few months. Do you feel like it's a responsibility as an artist, as a public figure, to provide that kind of experience for people or be there when they need art?
I don't feel that way personally, because that's not the way I think, but I did feel really strongly about, well, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to try to find, because I personally felt really helpless in the beginning of all this. And I was trying to find out where to donate and where I could help best, how I could help. And so it was important to me to sort of share whatever info I had that I was already doing and try to post like a charity every week for people who also feel helpless, even if they don't have a ton to donate. It's, whatever helps. And I think that was part of it for me. So it all sort of tied in. And, there's so many opinions out there right now. And I've tried to keep it to the music, the charity, and I feel like that speaks a lot for me.
So you mentioned earlier also that one of your great joys is collaboration and working with other artists, and you have worked with pretty much all of the greatest musicians alive at this point. So what have you learned? What kind of advice has really lasted in your memory from some of those experiences?
To be honest, I've never gotten a lick of advice from any of those people. Maybe I should have asked for some. But, they're all humble in their own ways, and they've never presumed to tell me what to do. But I think, you learn a lot by example. So I've learned so much from all of them just by seeing how they work, seeing who's on time, who's spontaneous, seeing who's tied to, overdubs and a click track, which, is a whole other way of working. So I've learned the most by just watching how they go about things,
So much of music by default is ultimately a male-dominated industry. And so I was curious if you have ever felt challenged by the settings that you've been in, or if you've noticed change over the past few years and sort of a movement towards more equal setting.
That's interesting. I mean, I see a lot of strong women in the industry, though I know you're right in what you're saying. Maybe I gravitate towards strong women, but there's strong women at my record label, from my record label to a band I'm in, to other artists who I see doing it. I definitely think things are changing because I see a lot of strong women out there. And I think I've also just been really lucky my whole career to be surrounded by people who let me be who I am. I wasn't in the section of the music industry where I felt stifled. So in that way, I think I've maybe been a little bit sheltered from that thing you're talking about.
What about what comes next? Do you have a vision or an idea of what you'd like to see happen in music, in performance, in collaboration, both personally from a career standpoint, but also more broadly as you look at this world you've worked in for so many years?
I have no idea. I'm just sort of waiting for, the hard part to hopefully get better in all walks of life for everyone. It's just, there's so much coming at us right now. And so many people are having a hard time. So, I just hope that music can continue. Obviously, we all miss playing live. So I think once that's sort of back in the game, it's going to feel even more special for people.
And I know that I turn to things like your music to get me through right now. What are you turning to help you find that sense of solace?
A lot of music, from everything from, we have a 80s playlist, from our childhood that's really fun, to new music, to old music. I mean, all kinds of music. Podcasts, a lot of audiobooks. Every time I try to read a book, I fall asleep. So I've been trying to listen to audiobooks lately.
Very understandable and relatable. And in the spirit of the Time 100 list, one thing we often ask many of our guests is, what's giving you hope right now? And, what's inspiring you?
I think just the fact that everybody's kind of beat down and tired, but everybody is really aware of what's going on right now on so many levels. And people are trying to instill change where they think it's needed. And it's so needed in so many places. So I think that gives me a lot of hope. If people were just kind of like whatever, then I would be hopeless. But they're not. So it's great. Everybody needs to just keep doing it because it's hard.
Thank you, Norah, for spending time with us today. But before you go, you have a special performance for us. Here is Norah Jones performing To Live.
Thank you, Norah, for that beautiful performance. And thanks to all of today's guests. I also want to thank you, our audience, for tuning in. For more information on this year's Time 100 list, visit time.com. And make sure to check us out next Thursday at 1 p.m. for an all-new episode of Time 100 Talks. We hope to see you then.